Thank you. I know this is the last talk of the.
Yes, last but not least.
Yes. So today I'm going to talk about measuring media mix impact, and the big thing is this idea of incrementality, because incrementality kind of really measures what is our incremental impact of spend, because that's what we really want to know. How efficient are we spending it? And the reason why we have to use this kind of idea of Geo-Lift is kind of two main points. The first is this kind of global fragmentation of digital tracking. We have the GDPR for Europe, we have the CCPA for California, also Apple has ATT, so we can't track users that we used to. So years ago, we used to be able to do like multi-touch attribution to see what is the impact of dollars spent. And again, we don't know where it's going to go in the future, so having this in our toolkit is useful because it just gives us a way to look into some of these black boxes, such as YouTube, Google, Meta, anything like that. And then the other big thing is not just this global fragmentation, not being able to track people, but also these walled gardens are really kind of grading their own homework. They say one thing, but in actuality, it's something else. So this attribution mirage is, I would say, kind of one of the most important pictures is that this platforms could say, hey, you spent $100, we got 10x ROAS for you. But in actuality, maybe 80% of that would actually have come, or 8x would have come through organically, no matter what. So we didn't have to spend as much. So in actuality, we got a 2 ROAS. So ROAS is return on ad spend. So for each dollar you spend, I would get $2 back. You might also, some other companies do it as cost of acquisition, which is called CAC. And instead of being ROAS, it'd be called ICAC. So you might see either way, depending on what is the business KPI. Is it either through acquisition or is it through revenue? And a lot of the time, also, these platforms really are optimizing for purchases. And those people that are highly to purchase are probably going to purchase even without seeing ads. So really, you really want them to have this high lift where it's like the people you need really prod to get them to purchase, because those are the people that is the most effective for this advertisement. So this is the biggest thing, is that we really want to know what the real impact is. We don't care what these platforms are saying because, again, they're grading their own homework. They're going to say, hey, we got everyone that you need to, but in actuality, we would have gotten them otherwise. Another thing is that because we can't see everyone through the internet, say a person sees an ad on Google, YouTube, maybe TikTok, Instagram, and then they convert within 7 days, because usually a lot of advertisers use a one-day view or a one-day click, 7-day view through for attribution. So all those platforms would count that person once. So that means you get 4 on your actual accounting versus 1. So it's always kind of fun to look through, give an attribution of these platforms and say, okay, how many did we acquire? They're usually well over of what we actually come from our business. So these are the two big reasons of why we want to use Geo-Lift. Is one, because sometimes we can't actually track people around, especially in Europe. In the US, we do have things, notice the data mesh, where we can actually track people, like the graph of people. But again, that could go out any day. So again, having this in the back of our pocket is useful because some regions we can and some regions we can't measure. So the solution behind this is to use geos as a unit of experiment. So instead of being the actual individual, we're going to take a higher viewpoint and now randomize not by the individual, but by regions. And this works because, again, this is going to be privacy agnostic. And some platforms you can, and this is only useful if you can spend in these certain regions by platform. If the platform doesn't allow you to do this, then this kind of, again, falls apart. But this is privacy agnostic, and again, the US could have some sort of GDPR because California has it, and they usually move first, and then usually slowly cascades down. So this is one way, it's this idea of like it's synthetic control, but what we really want to do is we're trying to model a counterfactual. We can't ever see someone in 2 states. You either give them a treatment or you don't. So this is kind of the idea of like a Rubin causal model. And what we do is we say, okay, we're going to change something in the treatment group, and we have our control group. Now, what we assume is that, say they look the same before any treatment, and then post-treatment, what we say is, okay, under no treatment for a treatment, they would look similar to the control. And then we use that as our counterfactual baseline, compare it to what we truly observed, and that difference is what our lift would be. And that's going to be our incrementality or our ROAS. And that's kind of the big thing, is that this is one way to get away from the privacy. And again, it's all about coming up with a counterfactual. And these counterfactuals are just going to be our control states or DMAs. So you can use DMAs, zip codes, states. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this for different regions. So when does this work and when does it not? So one big thing is that you need to have a lot of spend to have a high impact. You can't say we get about $1 million in revenue and we're only going to change spend by a couple $100. You're not going to see an impact. So you need to make sure that you have a high spend and high impact for that. I've run into some issues where it was like we only use a little bit of spend and you see nothing. It's flat because again, there's too much noise to the signal that you would actually be picking up. Another is when you have untrackable channels. So that's like TV, CCTV, podcasts, anything where people can just observe it outside, billboards, anything like that. And what this also is good for is if you have what's known as a media mix model, or a multi-touch attribution model. Those are kind of going away because again, it's harder to track people around the internet. But a media mix model is kind of a top-down view of how our spend affects our acquisition. And that's in these Geo-Lift tests or any incrementality tests are very important for calibrating it just because a lot of these models have a lot of parameters and sometimes they're over-parameterized and the model can, depending on where you start, can kind of go anywhere. So it's really just to help pin down these models. Some of the poor conditions that we have is when you have low volume, so again, where you can't really move the needle on something. So again, there's a lot of noise in the data compared to kind of what you would have. Another is if you have the platforms themselves to run these tests, like Facebook has it in-house. Snapchat, they partner with House, which is another, they actually do Geo-Lift testing. TikTok, probably in the last 2 years, has their own in-house now incrementality. You can do it through Google. Some channels like this, but again, you might also want to do a Geo-Lift on those because they're grading their own homework in-house and you don't really know. They could be kind of like teasing a little bit more. So you can also use it for those channels as well. And again, one of the big things is like, can the business do this? Because not only going dark where you shut spend off, you're going to be losing revenue. Is the company going to want to do that? But also say you want to put more money into it, and it's not going to be as efficient. You could be burning dollars, and again, does the company want to do that? So you also have to think about how it kind of impacts the business. But again, how I think about it is that there could be some short-term hurt by doing these inefficient things, but over the long run, you gain efficiencies, which then helps you allocate your dollars such that you get the highest return on your ad spend. So this is kind of how I like to think about the practitioner's roadmap. So it's this idea of like your hypothesis all the way to your analysis. So kind of the first is you want to define what you want to measure. And there's kind of two big things that we can. So it's your KPIs, sales or acquisition. So those are kind of two big KPIs. And then what you want to do is figure out, do you want to just go dark where you just want to say, hey, what is that incrementality? Or you can go on the flip side and kind of start carving out what's known as this diminishing returns curve. Because a dollar from $1 to $2 is going to be much more effective than going from $1 million to $1 million in one. You can think about it as you go down farther and farther capturing individuals, it becomes costlier and costlier for each additional one. So that we get this kind of idea of diminishing return. And a crucial thing is you need to be able to track this at the geo level specifically, and that you want it at the daily as well. Then this arrow between market selection and power analysis kind of is a loop because you want to pick your markets. You want to validate that they're good matches across each other. And then you want to run a power analysis. Can you actually detect your minimal detectable effect? If that doesn't work, then you go back to your market selection, try another, and kind of go back and forth until you can see either, well, it's feasible to do this, given the amount of money we want to spend, and the variation in our KPI that way. And then, again, we want to execute it. So usually these run about 4 to 6 weeks, 2 to 4, depending on the size of it. And then you always want to have this kind of idea of a cool down period because there's a ramp up, depending on if you increase spend, or a cool down where, say, you start spending again, it's not going to take effect immediately. It also depends on the price of your item. Or if it's a pretty cheap good, it's probably going to be quick to ramp up, but something that's a little bit more expensive, like a car, a person's not going to say, oh, I saw an ad for a car, I'm going to go buy it. It takes a little bit longer. So it really depends on kind of the price of a product. And then once you have that, then you have all your data, then you can run the analysis. And I'll talk about kind of 3 different approaches, like simplest to the more complex, of difference to difference. synthetic controls, and then this idea of a Bayesian structural time series. So I talked a little bit about the two different tests. We have the scale test where you want to carve out this diminishing return. And the real question is, does spending more money yield more? And again, it might not be like, oh, we go from, you might increase your ROAS, but you're still above $1. So your ROAS is above $1. How far can you go into that? And if you think about it, if you take a step back, at the end of the day, if you have multiple channels, you always want this marginal ROAS to be equal across it. So for each dollar in spending, it's going to be the same impact across all channels. Because if there's a channel that's more efficient than all other ones, you're going to want to put your money down there. And again, this is just picking up the the responsiveness of each dollar as you increase a spend. And also, depending on the time of year, there could be year effects, like during the holiday. It sometimes can be more costly because it gets more expensive for bids. Also, people are more eyeballs and things like that. And the nice thing for this is to test out new channels and growth phases, and also low saturation channels. So some channels can saturate really fast. It's like I can only spend a couple $100s a day in there, versus some you could spend a couple hundred or a couple thousand. So it really depends on, and that's the way to figure out is that saturation of medias by testing the scale. The other side is this idea of go dark, where it's like maybe we don't know the incrementality, we just want to get what it is first, and then we can start doing the scale. And this is just saying, is this channel efficient? Because maybe it's not. Maybe for each dollar we spend, we're getting less than $1 back. But also that depends on the company. If there's maybe network effects, you want to get as many people on it, even at a loss, because then eventually become more efficient. So it probably depends on what the business wants and what the business is doing. So again, this is just shutting it off and seeing what happens. And again, this is really useful for retargeting and high saturation channels, because say we just want to figure out what the ROAS is. So that's coming up with what tests we want. So do we want to do some sort of scale, or we just want to see a holdout going dark? So what we also need to do is really come up with what are the markets that we want. The more markets, the better, because again, you'll get more power over their test, and that's a good thing. So the way I like to do these is use a stratified sampling strategy, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to take New York and compare it to a small town in Indiana. That's not apples to apples. So what we can do is we can use sales, group those together, also demographics, and come up with these stratified groups of different markets, geos, DMAs, whatever we're randomizing on, and then randomize within those. And then that would actually be comparing now more apples to apples regions across each other. But also you don't want to just look at the whales of your market, because that could be different than having smaller dwarfs. So you want to try to have a sample of different size markets throughout to really get what's your population effect. And again, I talked a little about it, the statistical validations. You want to see with some of these models, you can say, okay, can I use my control to predict my treatment? Because that's what you want. If you can't, you want to go back to the drawing board and pick different markets. So this is where that iterable loop between market selection and power analysis come in play for that. And the last step you always want to do is this idea of an AA test. So you've picked your markets, and what you can do is you can go back in time, select a random post or pre-treatment period, build a model, and then say, okay, now I'm going to predict this post-treatment. And what you should observe is zero lift, because you've done no intervention whatsoever. But if you do see a lift or a decrease or increase, that's a problem. That means that they're not balanced well. Or there could have been some idiosyncratic shock that happened in some of those markets that aren't in the other ones. So it's this back and forth to figure out what markets you want to select for these different treatment and control groups. So what we also want to do is figure out how long we run the test, because we don't want to just say, hey, we're going to run this test, run it, like we saw no lift. Because there could be pretty big business impacts, especially if you go dark. If you're trying to hit a certain number, especially if you're a publicly traded company, you got to hit that. If you're private, it's a little bit different. But or also if you're scaling up, you don't want to say, wow, we spent $1 million and we found nothing out. They're not going to be happy with that. So you really want to figure out where can we get the most bang for a buck this way. So I always have to think about this minimal detectable effect. It's like, what is, given how long we run it, how much money we spend, and how many markets we have, what can we measure? And say you assume that, oh, we can only measure 10%, but in reality, we need to see a 5%. It's like, okay, well, we can't measure that 5%. So in that case, we wouldn't want to run that test, go back to the drawing board. So again, this is where that iterable loop is like knowing how many, or maybe instead, if you can't, add more markets into it. And there's this trade-off of also, as you want to test more and more, you don't want to have every market happening in tests because then you can't use any other markets. So it's this balancing act of you want to test as much as you can, but you want to make sure that you can measure that impact and things like that. So to talk a little bit about, so now to go into like these different methodologies. So the difference in difference is probably the simplest one. Though it makes one big assumption, is this idea of parallel trends, is that your markets and your treatment and control should move in unison pre-treatment, and then post-treatment, your assumption is that they would have moved the same even without that intervention. And the nice thing about this is you can just use a straight linear regression with a dummy variable. You're in treatment or you're not. Also, what you want to do is incorporate other variables into that regression, because that helps kind of soak up the error term, the variance in that, which will help reduce your standard errors on your, in this case, treatment effect, where you can get more likely to get to a statistically significant result. So that's the difference in difference. So again, this is probably the simplest one. You can use any sort of statistical package. I mean, I use stats models for Python. You can use sklearn, but they don't have standard errors, so that's why I always use stats models, because they give you actually more output than just, here's your coefficient. Another approach is this idea of synthetic controls, which I like this one a lot, rather, because it's a little bit more complicated, but I think it gives you more robust answers. And what this does is, instead of relying on a parallel trends, what it does is it uses all the other controls, regions, markets, or geos, and then puts a weight on them to predict what the outcome would be for the other treatment markets. And the nice thing with this is that what you get is you just get a counterfactual of, hey, if we didn't spend anything, we'd be on this dashed line. But what we have truly observed is that solid line, which would be our incremental lift for that. So the nice thing with this, again, you don't have to worry about the parallel trends. It's just how good is my fit pre-treatment? And then if it's a good fit pre-treatment, most likely it's going to be a good fit post-treatment. And then that difference between your counterfactual and your truly observed is going to be what your lift is. The last, which is a little bit more involved, is the idea of this Bayesian structural time series, or it's also known as BSTS. The only thing with this is you need a little bit more data, because it takes into consideration seasonality. It can take day-week effects without having to put it explicitly into the model. And again, it does this a very, very similar thing as synthetic controls, but instead of using or a kind of a regression approach, it just uses a Bayesian approach around that. And also compared to, I would say, the other approaches, they give you significant levels. These give you credible intervals, so you can talk about it. We expect 95% of the time it to be within this region. So it's a little bit different than your confidence intervals. In Bayesian statistics, they use credible intervals as a way to describe error around a point estimate for that. So all these, you also have to worry about a few different things. The handling seasonality, because there could be differences across time. So hopefully, if anything that could be idiosyncratic to it doesn't happen. But again, we can only observe. We can't control that kind of stuff. So hopefully, if there's any macro effects that happen across both treatment and control, that gets soaked up. That's fine, because that's not what we're worried about. It could have an effect on what the ROAS is. It might not be as high if there's maybe some recession or something goes on. It could be a little bit higher. But any macro effect across all markets will get soaked up into the model and not have to worry about it. The one thing you do have to worry about are the idiosyncratic shocks, which are either to a control unit or to a treatment unit that could influence what that return on of the ad spend is. And again, this really is a violation of the counterfactual that nothing changes between your treatment and control, but in actuality, there was. So what I do is usually we'll drop, but the only thing with this is you lose power, so you might not get to it, but again, you can't really do anything about it. So what I usually do is I just drop that unit from the analysis. And talking to a few other people that run Geo-Lift tests, that's what they do as well. Just kind of a matter of fact, like we can't really do anything about it, and if you put it in there, it's not going to be what the true ROAS is. Versus if we remove it, we not might get as much statistical power, but I think it's better because it'd be a more truthful return on ad spend that we could get. And I talked about this a little bit earlier, this idea of this cool down period, and this is this idea of a carrier effect. $1 today spending on advertisements may be worth 25 cents tomorrow, which is then worth 5 cents the next day. So just because someone sees an ad today doesn't mean they're going to immediately go out and buy it. They're going to maybe take a little bit of time. So once you run a test, you don't want to just say, this is the end of the test, I'm now going to run my analysis. You probably need to wait another 2 weeks for all of that change in spend to kind of fall out of the demand side of things. And also, it takes a little while to burn in as well, depending on if you increase your spend. Because again, these channels, a lot of, especially the like Meta, Google, there's algorithms in the back where they're trying to optimize, like what ad at what time and everything like that. It takes a few days for it to learn. So how do we kind of interpret these results? Well, usually we get point-wise estimates, but we don't really want to use those because, again, it can be very noisy day in, day out. So what we do is we use an aggregate or cumulative effect. So what we do is we'll sum it all up, kind of see what the error bars, again, we always want to be above 0. That's everything. So the top one, we'd have a statistically significant result. Good. We can measure the ROAS. Fortunately, the bottom one, because it's not different than 0, we would say that there's really no effect of that ad spend if we just turned it off, or if we doubled it, maybe we oversaturated way too much in that maybe we shouldn't go into that. But the big thing is what we want to actually get out that is useful for the business, marketers coming up with where they should spend, allocate, is the ROAS, which is just the sum of our total incremental conversions or total revenue, however what we're looking at, and divided by our total media spend. And that's what we'll get as our ROAS. And again, this will most likely always be lower from what the platform says. The platform is grading their own homework. They always want to say, hey, spend more money with us. One of the platforms we use, they said, oh, you can spend X number of dollars more. Like, we haven't even come close to spending that much money. That's probably not what we want to do. But again, they have a very different incentives than what we do as the business. So this is just a little kind of simple case study to kind of walk through like how we want to think about this. So in this case, we have a brand X that's going to launch about a $50,000 campaign on YouTube. And we're going to run it for 4 weeks. So this is like, we haven't used YouTube before. We want to know what the incrementality is. Sometimes YouTube and all these can use what are known as ghost ads, where they say, oh, okay, we're going to serve these 2 people, but we're going to withhold this one. And they, within their platforms, can do this incrementality test. But again, you also might want to run it yourself because, again, that's going to be very different. And to ensure this test, you want to first stratify. Again, depending on how much money you have in the volatility, you might not be able to expand it as much as you might need. But again, you always want to make sure to find similar-looking regions. So once you find all that, you get your markets, your geos, whatever, in their balance. Then what you do is you go spend the money, wait for, say, 4 weeks, and then another 2 weeks for your cool down, and say, okay, now we're ready to measure. So you can go look at your platform. The platform says, YouTube's like, yeah, you got 6 times ROAS. I was like, okay, we measured actually just 2.5. So that's a big difference. Like you would say, oh wow, 6 ROAS, let's keep putting more money in there. But in actuality, it's like, whoa, it's not that high. It's only a 2.5, but say maybe there's another channel that's 3. It's like, okay, maybe we shouldn't spend 50,000. Maybe we spend 40,000, take that 10,000 and put it into a more efficient channel. So that's where this is useful. And this would just be kind of like a go dark, is that we're just going to turn it spend on for some markets. But you can think about maybe you have been spending money and you haven't seen what that return on ad spend. You could say, okay, we're going to take these markets, turn off ad spend. When you do that, you also have to take in consideration how much you're spending into the platform at a daily level. The reason why is those algorithms are always going to allocate as much dollars as they want. So you need to proportionally remove your daily budget of what you're going dark in. Otherwise, your control is going to get that extra dollars, which isn't your business as usual. So in that case, you could overestimate what your ROAS is because they're getting more money. So those are a few like kind of get-yous that you can have in the real world. Is like because the platforms are always going to spend what you're giving them. So if you say $100, you take two geographic units out. It's going to take what it was spending in those and spend it in the control markets as well. So you always want to pull back your money on a daily level on these platforms if you decide to do a Geo-Lift test. And then, as I said, it's like, as you see, there's about a 58% reported reduction in the conversion rate compared to organic. So there are some people that are just going to convert no matter what in that case. So in here, it's saying like instead of doubling the budget, that's like the 6 ROAS could be. But again, if you double it, maybe the 6 ROAS turns into 4. Or maybe if you do it and then you take a test, like, wow, it's actually under $1. We went too far. So you want to back it out in that case. So kind of bringing it kind of all together and over the line would be some of the common pitfalls you have to worry about, or contamination. Hopefully, if there is someone if you have 2 close regions, sometimes there can be, where there's some sort of spillover between the treatment and control. So usually you want to try to find geos that are separated so you don't get the spillover effect. Another is a low signal. If you only are going to spend a little money, a few dollars, it's not going to have a big effect if your revenue is $1 million. That's going to be an issue, and you're not going to be able to pick up an effect, and it's just a wasted test. Though, I think it's the stat. I think it's about 25% of all tests, or 75% of all tests show no lift. I don't know if that's true for this, but just in general in A/B testing, not everything's always going to win. And again, it's a learning experience because each business is going to be different. Each channel is going to be different and things like that. Also, creative can play an effect too. So there's just a lot of moving variables, and I have to make some simplifying assumptions. Another is co-founders, and this is maybe someone else is running a Geo-Lift test, a competitor, and they're using their markets. Or they really go hard into a market that you don't know. So these are these idiosyncratic shocks that you have zero impact over. And again, then that would invalidate the counterfactual. So there's, again, you have to worry about those, but hopefully they don't know where you're spending your money or doing tests to be able to do that. And then kind of this idea of scalability. There is this experimentation tax. There is going to be either a loss of revenue or just a loss in money due to like you testing something out. You might not get that in return. So there's always this, like I stated earlier, a short-term hurt for a long-term gain. And again, it's a learning as you go on, and you want to learn what these channels are doing because again, some channel could be oversaturated. It's like, wait, if we take $10,000 from channel A and go to channel B, we actually can increase our revenue. So this is where we really want to test to help marketers allocate dollars efficiently because we don't want to just be throwing money away and say, oh, wow, you did really well revenue-wise, but we could have actually done better if we reallocated our dollars. Another is granularity limits. So this is very good for like larger kind of ad buys. So it's like TV, billboards, podcasts, and things like that. But if you want to get very hyper focused and like retargeting, you can't really do this because again, we're doing Geo-Lift because of the privacy agnostic. But if you're retargeting, you kind of know who that person is. And then this last one is test collisions. So you don't want to be testing multiple things in all the different markets. If you have one treatment, that stays in that one treatment. If you have a control, you could use that for other treatments. But again, if you're moving 2 things in a treatment at once, you don't know what's going to be moving your KPI. This is the idea of that ceteris paribus, all else equal. you only want to move one thing so you can measure that one thing. And, well, thank you. So any questions?
Yeah, I got one. So in your experience with this Geo-Lift approach, what have you found as the sweet spot or optimal resolution for this method with regards to like the geographic catchment area focused on? Is it product service driven, like where you're saying there, if you're doing TV spend? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of dictated by what that catchment area is, or have you found that there's differences between doing zip to zip comparison versus metropolitan statistical area versus metropolitan statistical area, state to state, so forth?
Yep, yeah. I usually try to use the DMA just because that's kind of a lot of platforms also you can target on those.
Okay.
Some you can do zip codes, but zip codes can bleed over easier. So the DMAs are kind of like, you can separate them a little bit better so there isn't that bleed over across them. And also depending on what type of advertisement, TV, like brand, is usually a little bit harder to measure what the incrementality is because it takes a longer to figure out what the ad is. But there is kind of like knowing, with platforms, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. Usually lower funnel advertisement is easier to measure than upper funnel. So upper funnel would be kind of the idea of like brand, a billboard, it's just kind of about awareness, but it's when it's being a little bit more targeted for that purchase, it's easier to pick up because that effect of the advertisement's more immediate than if like sometimes a billboard or TV ad, it takes 30 days for someone to make their mind versus like a little bit more about them trying to engage like, okay, 7 days. So it depends on kind of where you are in the funnel, like how effective it can be.
Got it.
Great presentation. I had a clarifying question about the synthetic control.
Yeah.
I know with TV you can't target by zip code. Were you suggesting though, just for analysis, you're picking specific zip codes combined, or were you suggesting like take a combination of DMAs and do some algebra?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. You take a multiple. You can get a few of them. I think Geo-Lift is a Facebook package, which will help with the power analysis and picking your regions, which is nice. But yeah, you'll get a pool of control and a pool of treatment. And what happens is you can do it a few different ways. You can use either like the pool of control to one treatment and then see kind of aggregate across all the different treatments. You can do it like all pooled and pooled. So there's different approaches that you can do, but you use all those control regions, and then there's a weight on each of them that then helps predict what your treatment would be. So there could be different weights for the different treatments, or if you use a pooled approach, then it would just be one global model.
Another question.
Yeah.
So,
No.
I think I saw at the beginning of your presentation, you're at Whoop.
Yes.
Currently, so that's the wearables device, right? The health wearables.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how are you guys leveraging this, or are you not?
No, we are. Yes, I help run these to help with our marketing because we have a media mix model that we have in-house that we use these lift tests to then help calibrate that model, which then goes into like, hey, this is our budget for, say, this quarter, this month. What is our predicted output? And then given the incrementality and the diminishing returns, because all these channels have them, what would be an optimal budget given what kind of the marketing has come? And the media mix model is more used as a tool. It's not saying, oh, we have to do what the model does. It's more of like a back and forth of, oh, this is saying this. Do we really want to spend into that? Maybe because, again, that could be oversaturated. Like, so it's like this kind of a back and forth, and then you can use kind of what the model is saying, like, oh, do we really want to spend that much? Let's test into it. And then, okay, oh, that actually isn't true. So then you learn more about the channel that then you can put into the media mix model for the next time. So it's this huge iteration loop of testing, trying things out, seeing what happens, like trying again, testing. So just a loop around of these three different things.
Ask another question.
Yeah.
So is it safe to conclude from that the media mix model is only as good as the data you have? In other words, if Whoop or anyone spends a lot of money in one region all the time or during a sports event, there's no variation. And so if nothing else, this is just a good way to convince people to add some variation.
Yes. Yep. That's exactly. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's a good.
And
yeah,
not to diminish the good analytics, but I mean, it is a good way to convince.
Yeah, because if you have no so you think about like variation in spend and variation in sales. If you have something flat, it's like, well, I can't attribute anything because I don't know. You just take like an average. But yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Just to build on that, so this I'm assuming is primarily targeting new customers, but if you're a bank and
Yeah.
you're trying to sell additional products, we obviously know a lot about those customers in other channels and complaints and whatever. So I'm assuming you could use these techniques to kind of vary your marketing spend based on that other knowledge as well.
Yeah, if you know where those people are coming from, it could, like, are you getting more people in certain geos that have multiple accounts versus not? And then how do you target those? Yeah, so that's a little bit different than just trying to figure out the incrementality. That's kind of more about the messaging and things like you can use this you can use this methodology for messaging too. Like how do you want to present
as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Last